This is a shir on Likutei Sichos, book 26, the portion of Pekudei, the second Sicha. It's going to be a fantastic journey through several key issues. The first one being accountability. When somebody collects money for a community project, how is the approach to the accountability? So we're going to see that Moshe Rabbeinu considered it to be a very virtuous thing to give an accounting of everything he collected. And against this backdrop, the Sikha starts. And the reason why we find in our Torah, when it comes to building, collecting the money and building the Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu gave an exact accounting, what he did with the silver and the copper. But he doesn't give an accounting about the gold. The gold is more valuable than silver and copper. He doesn't give accounting for that. So the Klei Yakar, the Pirush, the commentary called Klei Yakar, to place him historically, he's a little bit before the Baal Shem Tov, about 400 years ago or so. So the Klei Yakar wrote that when they finished the construction, the basic construction of the Mishkan, Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to give an accounting so that there should be no suspicion about how he, that he had used all the money for the purpose it was contributed. But there were the clothing of the high priest, the clothing of the Kohen, and needed to be made also out of gold. So he hadn't made the clothes yet, so he didn't yet give an accounting for the gold because he still needed to use it in the clothing. He started to give for the silver and the copper because those things already he could account for what the silver and copper was used for. And afterwards, he was going to give an accounting for the gold. Now, what we find is that he never does land up giving accounting for the gold, even after they prepare the clothing of the priesthood of Kahuna. Why not? Why did he stop the accounting process after the silver and copper and didn't continue? Granted, the gold would be delayed because it was still going to be used to make the priestly ornaments. But after he finished those, he should have given a full accounting for the gold. So the Klei Yakar says that there is a medrash that says when Moshe Rabbeinu wanted to give the accounting for everything, he had a discrepancy. He couldn't account for 1,775 shekels. Everybody gave a half shekel of silver, and he couldn't. He could account for most of it, for 100 kikar, but there was a balance of 1,775 shekels. A heavenly voice came out from heaven and says, "I'll tell you what you did with it, Moshe. You're forgetting what you did with it. You used it to silver coat the pegs. Don't worry, it was used for the right reason. And in this way, it was fulfilled from above, from heaven. What we know that it says about Moshe later in the Torah, that Moshe is trustable, is faithful in all my house." So in other words, he got today we have you can get a certification from the highest level of, what is it, ISO or whatever it is. Here, Hashem himself gave certification to Moshe that the books are good. Everything is faithful. In other words, even though this announcement was about the silver, there was a silver amount that Moshe couldn't account for. A heavenly voice came out and said, "I'll tell you, Moshe, where that silver went to. It went to this and this use to coat the pegs and hooks." Once there was this heavenly agreement, this heavenly certification about the silver, so there was no need. That's already a statement about the persona and the integrity of Moshe Rabbeinu. So there was no need for him to continue giving accounting as if he wants to prove that he is beyond suspicion of anybody, even who would be suspicious. Hashem has come and vouched for him. It can stop the accounting right now. However, says the Rebbe, there's two questions to that, to this supposition. Interesting to point out that when the Rebbe says there's two questions, in a footnote, the Rebbe already gives the answers to the questions. fascinatingly, as if before I even asked the question on this very, very special commentary called the Kli Yakar, I'm going to ask questions, but of course the questions have good answers as well. That's in a footnote. We'll get to it. What's the questions? First of all, when it says in the Torah these words, because these are words about 1,775, has a special melody in the Torah. It's said with a lot of emphasis. Ve'es ha'elef, and the 1,775. We read in the Hebrew, there's a lot of emphasis. But that, the Medrash says, is Hashem's announcement from heaven. This is what you did with it. But that's said before the accounting on the copper. Yet even after that, we find Moshe continues and gives an accounting on the copper. So if, as you say, once there was this heavenly voice, Moshe Rabbeinu discontinued giving accounting, why in the Torah do we see that he continued the account of the copper? It kind of throws a question into the thesis. The second question is, if there was a heavenly voice that Moshe Rabbeinu is faithful, why did Hashem not make that voice come down in a way that he shouldn't have to give any accounting? In other words, Hashem would obviously know that Moshe Rabbeinu wants to give an accounting because there are some people that are suspicious, even against the Moshe Rabbeinu. Some people are suspicious. So when he can't come up with the 1,775 shekels, that's when Hashem does a heavenly voice, because Hashem understands people are being suspicious. But that means Hashem could have anticipated, Hashem knows everything, could have anticipated from the first place that they're suspicious. Why not just make a heavenly voice coming and getting rid of the suspicion of Moshe Rabbeinu in the first place, before he starts giving the accounting? Why does Hashem let him start the accounting and then make the heavenly voice? Just say before, Moshe is faithful, everything is used, nothing is taken for personal. So those are the questions that Rabbi asks on this proposal of the Kli Yakar. But as I said, the Rebbe, before he even asks the questions, at the very beginning, when he says there are two questions, in a footnote, he gives the answers to these questions. So I'll just briefly tell you the answers. The answer to the first question he asked is, why does he continue, even after the heavenly voice, why does he still give an accounting for the copper? So we could say, says the Rebbe, that really Moshe Rabbeinu gave the accounting of the silver and copper together. So he finishes giving his accounting, and then all of a sudden he says, well, 1 second. In my silver count, I'm missing 1,775 shekel from the balance sheet to account for. And that's when the heavenly voice came out. But the Torah wrote it in a way that first he gave the silver, then the heavenly voice came, and then he gave the copper. Really, he presented the books. He presented the accounting. Here's what I did with the silver and the copper. And now some people are raising their eyebrows. The silver, you gave an accounting for most of the silver, the bulk of the silver, but there's a small part. We still don't know what the answer is to that. That's when the heavenly voice came. So really, it's just a question how the Torah told it, but he didn't continue giving accounting after that heavenly voice. Or another. And if you ask, why didn't Hashem just preempt this whole suspicion and just make a heavenly voice came down from heaven to say that Moshe is faithful? All the stuff he took, he used in good faith. You know why? Because by having the Torah allow Moshe Rabbeinu, by Hashem allowing Moshe Rabbeinu to start giving accounting and then backing him up with a heavenly voice, what it teaches us is that a person should make an effort, even if he's not, even if nobody's suspecting him, there's still a virtue in giving an accounting, because there's the Zohar and the Orach Chaim who all say that Moshe Rabbeinu didn't give an accounting because he thought people were suspicious, and not even because he thought that it's important to act and prove your cleanliness before Hashem, but not just before Hashem, before other people. So give an accounting. They hold no, that he did it for another reason. It wasn't to show. It wasn't. It was. It's an important thing when you finish a job. Give an accounting, even if you're not being suspected. So if Hashem would have said a heavenly voice directly before the accounting starts, we wouldn't know that. So these are answers that take away the questions that the Rebbe asked on the Kli Yakar. However, basically, the Rebbe is suggesting that this count, there's a deeper reason for this count, not just to give an accounting, but there's something else happening. And why isn't the gold counting? We want to answer. So paragraph 2 could say, says the Rebbe, we could say that when we say these are the countings of the Mishkan, which were counted through Moshe, it's not just about giving accounting, but it's also about bringing the Mishkan into its proper status. Let's first preface something else. The Torah is repeating after the first pasuk. It says, "Betzalel, the son of Uri, the son of Hur, did everything that Hashem told Moshe, and together with him he had working with him Ahaliav, the son of Achasamach, from the tribe of Dan, who was a master craftsman." Why does the Torah repeat these people's names again? We know that they were the ones that did the work. So commentaries, including Rashi, explain when it says that these workmen did everything that Hashem had instructed Moshe. It says everything that Hashem had told Moshe. It doesn't say everything that Moshe had told him. The lead craftsman was Betzalel. It doesn't say he made everything that Moshe told him. It says he made everything that Hashem had told Moshe. You know why? Because there were certain things that Hashem had transmitted to Moshe, which Moshe didn't properly transmit, or didn't, for some reason, transmit to Betzalel, and Betzalel intuited. He knew intuitively that he had to do what Hashem had said. And Moshe said, wow, you must have been in the shadow of Hashem when he was speaking to me, because somehow, even though I transmitted it differently, you caught on to what Hashem had really told me. So that's why it says, again, who the craftsmen are, and that they did what Hashem had told Moshe, not what Moshe told them. They had somehow intuitively knew what Hashem had told Moshe. This requires a further explanation. Why does the Torah tell us this piece of information between the pasuk that says these are the appointments of the Mishkan which were appointed through Moshe, and before it says the accounting, it says that Betzalel did as Hashem had told Moshe. Then it says, and this is the amount of the gold and the silver that people had brought. This concept that the craftsmen were Betzalel and that he intuitively did what Hashem had told Moshe should have been said before we talk about the counting. Once we speak about these are the things that Moshe Rabbeinu received, and we start talking about accounting, it should go straight to accounting. Why interrupt? It says these are the accountings. Then it says Betzalel made the Mishkan, and then it says, and these are the accountings. Starts giving us the exact quantities. It seems like there's an interjection here about Betzalel doing what Hashem had told Moshe in out of place, out of sequence. So the explanation is paragraph 3. The Mishkan had to be something that belonged to the entire community of Israel. You couldn't have a private Mishkan, that somebody would be, so to speak, the private donor, and he had more ownership than Mishkan. The Mishkan is a tabernacle. It's a place for Hashem's residing, his presence amongst the Jewish people. It needed to be representative of the community at large. And it was a testimony to the entire community that Hashem had forgiven the entire nation and was now going to rest his holy presence amongst them, even though they had all, at least by association, been guilty of connection to the golden calf. Now they were giving their personal commodities, all of the 13 or 15 things that they donated. It needed to be given in a way that it became communal property, not at all in the belonging of an individual. To do that, you need to voluntarily give it with a full heart to belong to the community. So how did that happen? That took place by the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu, the most collective person of the Jewish people, received all the ingredients, and by him receiving it on behalf of the community, he now, so to speak, it becomes his collective. He represents the collective as this most central person in the community. And now when he receives it, their gifts, it becomes communal property. After he gets this communal, the donations, he now can give it to the craftsmen who are making the Mishkan, Betzalel and Ahaliyav, that they should make it with the proper intention, according to the proper dimensions and contours and details that Hashem has instructed. Especially if you say that they didn't get paid for their work. You see, the thing of not getting paid for work is would mean that, in a sense, when a craftsman fashions something out of a material that's given to him, there's some kind of a relationship he has with that material. If he's not getting paid, could be that the value of his work, he has some kind of an ownership, which he then has to relinquish, because there's value in what he's brought to the thing. Or it's you say, oh, this is what Betzalel made. There's some personal ownership, or there's some personal reputation or application that applies to this thing, even though it's communal property. Even though it's possible that it didn't leave the communal status, but still. So that's why the one who had to first make it established as a communal, that this is communal property, is Moshe Rabbeinu. And then, after Betzalel finishes the Mishkan, you know what he does after that? After he finishes all the buildings of the Mishkan, and the Mishkan is a testimony to the Jewish people that Hashem resides therein. They have to make sure that it's Moshe Rabbeinu has to count and so to speak, appoint all the things that have been made. Well, Moshe Rabbeinu is taking into account all the things that were made, and now saying that they're communal property, so they have to all be brought to Moshe, and he gives an accounting for it, because in that way it becomes pure communal property. Not just, says the Rebbe, not just the fact that Moshe Rabbeinu had to sanctify it, they had to elevate all these physical things that were made to become sanctified, to be a recipient and a transmitter of the energy of Hashem, the holiness of Hashem. That we understand. Moshe Rabbeinu has to be the one to elevate and to make all these things holy, to flick the switch, so to speak. But also the fact that also this special quality for which each of the individual items of the Mishkan was made also had to be done through Moshe Rabbeinu. And this was done after Betzalel and Ahaliyav had made what they made. Everything was brought to Moshe. Moshe Rabbeinu accounted for it, and thus Moshe Rabbeinu kind of solidified its communal status and appointed each particular item for its intended purpose. And that's why the Torah says it out of sequence. It's not out of sequence. The Torah says these are the appointments and the countings of the things that Moshe Rabbeinu counted. And then it says, before I even tell you the accounting figures, that the reason Moshe Rabbeinu had to count it is because next verses, the ones that made it were Betzalel and Ahaliyav. So now we have some kind of a personal association that they've vested themselves into the making of the Mishkan. Now we go back and say, but that's why Moshe Rabbeinu had to be the one to count it and to appoint it, because he needs to bring it back to the status of being communal. So all of this, paragraph 4, there's extensive footnotes here. It would be really exciting to study the footnotes. It's beyond what I've really prepared for, so I'm not not going to go into it, but just one point here. We find that the appointing and the counting, which we say is so important to be establishing the Mishkan as a communal property, asks the Rebbe, why do we find that it's only in the gold and silver and copper? We don't find that there's an accounting given for the beams of wood, for the planks of wood, for the fabrics used, for the hangings. So if we need Moshe Rabbeinu to come and count it, to kind of bring it back to a communal, he as the community's central person, brings it back to a communal state, why isn't with all the ingredients, with all the commodities that we used in building the Mishkan? Why are we talking just about the gold, silver, and copper? Says that we could say that it's similar to the fact that there's a concept when you want to buy a house, how do you acquire, how do you make an acquisition on the house to show that it's yours? In the laws of acquisitions, there's always something you have to do. So if it's an item, you pick up the item. If it's a house, obviously you can't pick up the house. How do you show your ownership on the house? One of the ways is that you place either you make the door, there's no door, and you put up the door that shows your ownership on the entire house, although you've only put on the door. Or if there's a door already, you can lock the door, put in your own lock. This shows that you're the owner of the entire house. It's just a lock on a door, but the door is the entranceway to the entire house. The lock is what allows you to either keep people in or out. By you putting a lock in the door of the house, that shows, that establishes your ownership. So similarly, we could say that in we're talking about the planks, the walls of the Mishkan, and the roof of the Mishkan, which was fabric covering. We could say that what really was held those in place, there were pegs, and the pegs were made of either silver, they were either silver coated or copper, and those were accounted for. So if those things are holding up the walls and holding down the fabrics of the roof, it's like putting a lock on the door. It's and the accounting by Moshe was given for the commodities used for those pegs. So basically, what we're saying is that Moshe Rabbeinu did count Moshe Rabbeinu did, so to speak, count all those items. Those items are the ones that hold. We don't find that he counted the planks and the hangings, but he did count the commodity used to make the pegs that held the planks and the hangings. It would be like so he did something central to the actual structure of the Mishkan, which again made sure that the message was that it's a communal place, it's a communal building, it's a communal property, which represents the entire community of Israel, although there were individual craftsmen that made it, that didn't take it away from its centrality. Yeah, okay. Says the Rebbe another interesting thing on this topic. It's also a footnote, extensive footnote. We find that later on, the entire ingredients, all the articles of the Mishkan are brought to Moshe Rabbeinu. And he erects the Mishkan, which shows when for the first 7 days before the inauguration of the Mishkan as a communal place, Moshe Rabbeinu erects it and takes it apart for 7 days running, which obviously shows that it's a communal place. Why does he have to now? Why did he first have to do the counting? Says the Rebbe, because assembling the Mishkan is showing that the totality of the Mishkan is communal. That's true. It's connected to Moshe, who's a representative of everybody. But in the mitzvah of building the Beis Hamikdash, it's not just about the sum total, but it's also about the details. So when Moshe Rabbeinu counted the details of the gold, silver, and copper to show that in every detail, the even commodities that built up, the details of the Mishkan were also communal, not just the sum total. Now we move to paragraph 4. All of this is about the making of the Mishkan. When we come, however, to the clothing of the Kohen, we find that right away when Moshe was instructed to make the Kohen, to make the clothing of the priest, it says, and now you shall bring close to you. Rashi says, it means after you build the Mishkan, then you shall make the clothing of the priest. In other words, you can't make the clothing of the priest before you have an established Mishkan. First, make the Mishkan, the place where Hashem will rest. And now, after you finish making the Mishkan, and there is a physical space where Hashem is going to rest, now prepare the clothing for the people that will operate this Mishkan, which is the Kohanim. What would be the meaning behind this? Says the Rebbe that the effect, the actual happening of the holiness of Aharon and his children to be the ones to serve me in the Mishkan can only happen when there is the space where Hashem is going to rest. In other words, if you say I want Aaron to be the one to serve me when I'm present down here below, first there needs to be a place where Hashem will be present, and then we can talk about preparing Aaron to be the one to serve him, to serve God when He's present. But first there needs to be that ability to have a presence. For that, you need the Mishkan first. When you don't yet have the possibility of a place for Hashem to rest, and therefore you don't have the need to have a person to serve, a Kohen who's able to serve, there's no place. So first, make a Mishkan. Then Moshe Rabbeinu, then deal with the clothing of the priest. Right? So now we'll understand why he didn't have to count that gold that would have been used for the priestly clothing. As we said, the whole purpose of counting the things was in order to establish it as a communal thing, because it needs to be a place where Hashem testifies and shows that the Jewish people are His beloved nation. He's going to be with them even though they've done this sin, right? And that's why it needs to be so clearly a defined communal place that's not belonging just to individuals. But when it comes to the priestly clothing, the Bigdei Kahuna, which are not part of the actual building of the Mishkan, they're part of the service of the Kohanim. So even though there it also has to be communal money that pays for those clothes, but the emphasis here is not so important that they shouldn't have any association with the people that fashioned and tailored the clothing. Because the clothing of the Kohen is not part of this testimonial Mishkan, which needs to show that Hashem feels comfortable to be with every single Jew by being in the communal space of the Mishkan. You don't have that same emphasis in the clothing of the Kohen. So now we'll also understand something else about the gift, about the donation to the Mishkan. When it says that they brought all the donations for the Mishkan to Moshe, and the ones, Betzalel and Ahaliav and the other craftsmen, took all the commodities from before Moshe. It says that about the building of the Mishkan, but it doesn't say that about the clothing. It doesn't say that they took the fabrics, they took the gold that they needed for the fine blue wool that they needed for the clothing. The Torah doesn't emphasize. The Torah doesn't say that they took it from Moshe, even though yes, it was taken from the communal fund. But it just says they will take the gold. It doesn't say they will take it from before Moshe. In other words, they could get it directly from the donors. Why is that? But now, paragraph 5, according to this, we'll understand why. Because you didn't need that emphasis that it's coming to Moshe as the collective, the representative collective, and being taken from Moshe. You needed that emphasis to build the Mishkan. But now when it comes to the clothing of the Kohen, that's not the point. According to this, we'll also understand with an additional explanation why Moshe Rabbeinu had to be the one to bring and create the status of communal property and not somebody else, even though that technically every person could have donated it voluntarily to the community in a way that he is consciously giving it to the community. And that could be when they're giving it to the treasurer of the Beis HaMikdash as well. That's usually would be the case when you donate something to the Beis HaMikdash. You're giving it to the treasurer if you wanted to give it fully, so it goes there fully. Why here do we need Moshe Rabbeinu to be part of the process in a very real way? So it's not just because of the leadership of Moshe. It's also because Moshe Rabbeinu is the only person amongst the Jewish people that does not have any need for the atonement aspect from the golden calf. Everybody else was around, right? So even though they may have not have sinned, but by being there and not stopping it, they have some kind of a guilt by association. They are not fully innocent, or they cannot fully claim that they have nothing to do with the sin of the golden calf. The only one who had nothing to do is Moshe. He was on the mountain. He wasn't around. Couldn't even stop them. He didn't know about it. So therefore, the only one who doesn't need this testimony that Hashem is ready to rest amongst us is Moshe. He has no association with it. And therefore, all the other Jews, from the fact that they needed the Mishkan to also be an atonement for them, so when they are occupied, when they're busy with building the Mishkan, bringing things to the Mishkan, they still have a personal vested interest in it because they want this thing to work so that they can be sure, it can be clear to them that they're now been cleansed of this association with the golden calf. So it's not fully, there's some kind of a wholesomeness of a 100%ness that's missing in their ability to give it in a common way. So Moshe Rabbeinu, who he had absolutely zero connection, didn't need this in order to cleanse him from anything associated with the golden calf. By bringing it to him, he was able to be totally so to speak, transparent, be totally communal without any personal interest in it, simply to receive it on behalf of the entire collective of the Jewish people. And to the extent that we say that he was the one that everybody had to bring everything to Moshe when after it was fashioned, and he put up the Mishkan himself. He asked Hashem, how am I going to do it? One person. Hashem says, you just do it and it'll happen. You just do your part. Try. You'll see it'll happen. And Hashem made it happen, right? So it's a very important message for all of us. Try and do what you can do, even if it doesn't look like you can do it. Hashem will help you. If you're meant to do it, just try. Hashem will help you do it. Yeah. Paragraph 6, we could say there's another reason why it's particularly connected to Moshe, not just because he had no association with the golden calf, but also one of the great advantages that the Mishkan has, which is different than the other Beis HaMikdashes, is that the Mishkan is an eternal thing. Like the Gemara says, once the first temple was created, what did they do with the traveling temple, with the Mishkan? When they built the first temple in Yerushalayim, they built tunnels and they hid all of the items, all of the structure of the Mishkan down in the tunnels. So it will never be found and it will never be fall into enemy hands. Why? Because it's Moshe Rabbeinu made it. Anything that Moshe Rabbeinu made cannot be canceled out. No foe, no enemy, no adversary can be powerful enough to overcome something that Moshe Rabbeinu himself made. And therefore, because Moshe Rabbeinu has this transparency of being a transmitter of God and everything he makes is eternal, we needed every item of the Mishkan to come through the leadership and so to speak, the stamp and the seal of Moshe. When it comes to the clothing of the Kohen, it doesn't say about them that they're eternal. We need them in order to be able to have the Kohen. Kohen is required to wear them in order to go into the Beis HaMikdash and serve. But we don't find that the original clothing that were made were fashioned or were hidden away and never wore out or anything like that. No. So therefore, Moshe Rabbeinu didn't have to wait for to give an accounting of the gold of the clothing. He doesn't have to oversee in such a direct fashion the clothing. But all the other items of the Beis HaMikdash, the reason Moshe is giving an accounting is not just to show, or perhaps totally not to show that he's faithful. That can come from heaven. It can be told to the Jewish people. But to have an association and elevate and consolidate and make all the items of the Mishkan communal. Paragraph 7, we could say that this way we're looking at it now, that the reason to have the Pekudei, the reason to count The Mishkan is to really appoint it as being a place, a conduit for Hashem, a communal place. Also fits with the inner meaning of these words, Eile Pekudei HaMishkan. The word Pekudei can also mean um, a, a connection. What kind of a connection? When the deepest connection we know is when a man and woman connect in the deepest way, in a physically intimate way, representative of their deep spiritual intimacy, but it represents as well in a physical way. And that we know is called, it says that, and that we know it says before the language in halacha is that before a man travels, he has to lifkod et ishto. He needs to be together with his wife. He needs to create a bonding and a union that will prepare them to remain together even as they go, as he goes off on his way, and in a sense is separate. So that's the language. Pekida, pukat, eila. This is the Pekudei HaMishkan means the connections. What is the Mishkan connecting? The name of Hashem has two parts to it: Yud K and Vav K. So the Vav and the Hey need to be united, and the Yud and the Hey need to be united. This represents two levels of unification, which are spoken about in terms of the energy, so to speak, the godliness of Hashem's name. And the Mishkan was able to bring together all aspects, the unification of the last two letters, unification of the first two letters, and both of them together. So we can say that as representative of this, of all aspects of the energy of Hashem's name, so to speak, being brought together by the Mishkan, because the Mishkan was about bringing together all the aspects of the world and upper worlds and lower worlds and making it one streamlined and united entity. This now represents itself by the connection between the Mishkan and Moshe. This is why the Mishkan had to come together with Moshe, because Moshe represented a certain aspect of godliness. The Mishkan represented a certain aspect of godliness. And when the Mishkan is brought to Moshe, we have this full unity. Because we know the word Pekudei also means union, as in a man being united with his wife. Paragraph 8. This interpretation we say in the word Pekudei from the expression of Chayav Adam Lifkei Desishte, a man at certain times is obligated to be united with his wife, is not a different interpretation than the simple interpretation, which is counting. I mean, although counting is such an external thing, uniting at the depth of what we're talking, a man and wife, a husband and wife, is the deepest connection. How is something so external like counting connected with something so deep like that deep connection, intimacy? We'll understand that that total opposite, that one is so external, you can count things, the count of something, it doesn't tell you about the inside of it, and the deepest connection between husband and wife, which is the deepest of the deep, how do they connect? So the thing is, and especially that we say that the connection of husband and wife leads to, when there's a blessing, it leads to Hashem's infinity being projected into the earth, because children is a miraculous thing, and it also speaks to the infinity of Hashem, because children can then have children, can then have children, can have children. So the power of God's unlimited light is unfurled into the world through that connection of intimacy. Yet counting is so external. What's the connection between counting and deep intimacy? However, if they're both two separate meanings in that same word, there must be a connection to them. This is what the Rebbe always points out. When there's the same word has two disparate interpretations, because they're all being hinted to in the same word, there also needs to be some way they connect. How can counting and intimacy be connected? The explanation is that this is exactly the point of the Mishkan. The Mishkan had this oxymoron, this contradiction in concept. You took limited items, and they had to be made according to the dimensions that Hashem said, exact dimensions. And those exactly dimensioned things draw down the unlimited light of Hashem's presence. You're bringing down the Ein Sof, the unlimited, through doing something so pedantic and so limited. You couldn't have the Shekhinah didn't come down unless you made the exact dimensions of the Mishkan. How are those? So those two opposites are hinted at in these two opposing meanings in the word Pekudei. One is counting and one is intimacy. How is that? Exactly. That's the point. That Hashem, when he chooses, in even the most external and in the most finite dimensions, if he said that's the way they should be, that can be in a place where his expression of infinity can be expressed. And the allusion to this concept is in the fact that the Pekudei also has this counting and intimacy, the most external and the most internal. Paragraph 9. The deeper interpretation of this contradiction in Pekudei, counting and intimacy, is not just that the Mishkan had both an unlimited capacity, presence of Hashem, and a very limited, finite capacity, which is the exact dimensions of the Mishkan. But more than that, both of them became one thing. The limitedness itself of the Mishkan did not, the Gvul itself, the exact dimensions of the Mishkan, even when Hashem's unlimitedness shone through it, didn't lose its limitedness. At the same time, it became united with infinity. The finite wasn't blown away by the infinite. It maintained its dimensions. It had to be those dimensions. The Mishkan still had to be X by Y by Z. At the same time that the infinity of Hashem is pulsating through it. How can you have finiteness and infiniteness somehow wedded together? As we see, literally in the Mishkan, it had to be that way. That one of the fantastic things of the Mishkan is that the Aron Kodesh, the Holy Ark, had to be the dimensions that it was needed to be. At the same time, here's one of the miracles that happened. When you counted from the wall, each side of the wall of the Holy of Holies to the Aron, you got the same dimensions as when you counted from wall to without the Aron. And yet, let's take the exact amount. Let's say it's 10 across. So if you counted from wall to wall, it's 10. Yet if you counted from wall to ark, it's 5 and 5. But then you have another 2.5 for the space of the Aron. So that means it's 12.5 from wall to wall. But no, if you measured wall to wall was 10. Yet if you measured wall to one side of the Aron, wall to the other side of the Aron, you had 5 and 5, but you had 2.5 the width of the Aron. So it's like the Aron wasn't there. But if you counted the Aron, you got 2.5. It was there. So the space of the Aron, it had dimensions, it took up space, but it didn't take up space. It was space and not space. You see, it's one thing to blast away space. Infinity, there's no space. But it's a much bigger miracle, presence of God, to continue to have dimensions and yet be above dimensions at the same time. That doesn't make sense. That does not make any sense philosophically, logically. It's exactly what we're saying. It's Hashem's infinity. Infinity means that he's not bound by the laws of what we think infinity should be bound by. You can have place and not place at the same time. Yeah. In other words, says the Rebbe, the achievement of the Mishkan is that the finiteness, the limitedness itself is unlimited. Now, this is the connection between the two interpretations, the word Pekudei. Moshe Rabbeinu had to have the counting, he had to get the exact accounting, because everything needed to be exact in the Mishkan. But this very exactness was also a reference to the intimacy of Hashem with drawing down his holiness to reside in the physical dimensions of that limited space. The unlimited is being manifest in the limited. In a way that the limited Mishkan becomes eternal. We said it. Nobody could ever do anything to it. It's still there in the subterranean tunnels under the temple. Maybe we have the rebuilding of the third base, something that's spili in our days.